Welcome to Module 6 of this online course on enhancing trade information portals. Over the past 3 modules, we've discussed how to develop more effective contents in TIPs, in particular by developing an effective and sustainable continuous improvement process based on some sound and well-resourced governance structure for the TIP, as shown here. In this module, we will be describing in more detail how the maturity roadmap model, first introduced in Module 2, can be applied to augment our understanding of TIP development, and how the maturity of a TIP can be improved to more sustainably deliver higher quality content. To briefly remind ourselves, the model consists of 6 maturity levels, corresponding with increasingly aggregated and sophisticated TIPs, from a country having no trade portal at all, at maturity level 0, all the way to a portal aggregating all relevant information for traders and having various quality assurance and self-improvement mechanisms at level 5. Corresponding with these maturity levels are 5 areas of improvement: a governance structure, a governance process, leadership and stakeholder engagement, quantitative management, and technology/process change management. You will note that several of these areas relate directly to the governance framework presented earlier. What makes this model useful is the insight that achieving a certain level of maturity requires gradually and sequentially developing each of the 5 areas. So, in order to reach maturity level 1, at least some form of basic governance structure must exist, at least at the agency level, for these agencies to be publishing trade-related information online. This is necessary even if these agencies are not yet coordinating on any unified portal. In order to reach maturity level 2, a governance process must be added for at least some regulatory agencies to begin coordinating their efforts. Full consolidation at maturity level 3 requires leadership and systematized collaboration, and so on up to maturity levels. The model therefore provides a nice roadmap for how a TIP can be gradually improved, allowing us to develop recommendations for improving it based on where it stands on the maturity roadmap. So, beginning with a TIP at around maturity levels 1 or 2, what are some steps to improve the governance structure or leadership and stakeholder engagement in order to progress to maturity level 3? First, as we discussed several times, completely aggregating all the content needed on a TIP is very difficult without some kind of high-level mandate or political leadership. It is often helpful to have the mandate granted by the executive or legislature, as opposed to simply a ministry-level decision. International commitments and trade agreements can be very helpful here. For example, the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, Article 1, has been very useful for several countries in initiating work on their TIPs. It can often be helpful to align the TIP management with an active National Trade Facilitation Committee or a similar pre-existing body. Such committees already have the required mandate in place to coordinate a country's trade facilitation strategy, and therefore can spearhead comprehensive initiatives like developing a TIP. Should the National Trade Facilitation Committee not be very active, it is also possible to draw upon an agreement between willing agencies to provide a clear mandate for consolidating agency-level information portals into a common TIP. Next, once a mandate for developing or enhancing a TIP is secured, strong collaboration with all relevant agencies, as well as business stakeholders, needs to be established and maintained. The importance of collaboration with the private sector should not be forgotten, as it is traders who will be the main users of the TIP. For this purpose, the mandate may specify that all the relevant regulatory agencies should be involved in the routine updating of the TIP, if not directly, then indirectly as reviewers. The National Trade Facilitation Committee can serve as a steering committee, tasking a subcommittee or working groups with reviewing and improving the TIP and related processes. Next, as highlighted previously, the mandate should also specify a clear lead agency. This is to avoid a diffusion of responsibility in managing the TIP. Typically, it is useful to give this responsibility to a regulatory agency which already has some expertise in trade regulations and procedures. This could be the country's Department for International Trade, as another facet of their mission to promote trade. It could also be given to whichever department handles trade negotiations. For example, the EU TIP is managed by the Directorate General for Trade, which may be why information on international treaties was presented so prominently on the old EU Trade Help Desk. Alternatively, Customs is another candidate, given that they also have a lot of expertise in the necessary regulatory procedures. The TIP organization could also be managed by a business entity, like in the case of the Republic of Korea, where the Korean International Trade Association manages the TIP. In most countries, TIPs have been government or donor-funded, and involving the private sector may be a way to make them more sustainable. Lastly, one must institutionalize a governance process, which was also discussed in Module 5. Here, the recommendation of the Maturity Roadmap model is to follow the Plan, Do, Check, Act approach. First, planning. That is, scoping the TIP improvement project and listing all tasks to be completed, especially tasks which require collaboration from different regulatory agencies. Next comes implementation, typically improving how the content from the various agencies is aggregated and presented through a single TIP, as we discussed before. One must also consider the continued operation of the site, both in terms of website maintenance and administering various ongoing services like a help desk or handling error reports. Then comes monitoring and evaluating, which requires soliciting and reviewing performance metrics. Finally, the results of the evaluation are used to suggest further improvements, which then become new tasks, which then need to be planned, and the cycle repeats. Moving from Maturity Level 3 to Maturity Level 4 is all about strengthening that feedback cycle. This stage has two key elements. First, the feedback solicitation for the evaluation step becomes automatic or semi-automatic, with some form of quantitative defect detection mechanism. This could be applied to detect issues related to all the different quality attributes of the content, its accuracy, timeliness, consistency, and such, plus to any services like FAQs or helplines a TIP may provide. The most basic and essential way to do this is to find ways to get users to report their issues. For example, with a Report Issue tab on the TIP, or regular surveys. But you will also want to get feedback from relevant experts, for example, by organizing an interagency team which works with regulators to capture the current end-to-end procedures for clearing imports and exports, and ensures that this is accurately and completely published on the TIP. It can also be valuable to organize regular and independent peer review by domain experts. These could, for example, be drawn from relevant regulatory agencies or the private sector. Or the TIP may deploy domain-competent auditors to certify the accuracy of the contents. The second element is to get better at integrating the feedback that is collected, particularly through quantitative management. That means having quantitative metrics of the TIP's performance and integrating these metrics into the improvement process. Suggestions for such metrics and how to use them, for example by using page views to direct the efforts of the TIP management, were discussed in the previous module. Lastly, how to move to maturity level 5. There are 3 key capabilities to highlight here. The first one is an automatic or semi-automatic defect prevention mechanism. The root causes of problems must be carefully analyzed to not only fix them, but prevent their reoccurrence. For example, updating the TIP could be automized whenever relevant agencies change the content on their platforms. Verification steps can also be made automatic, or at least a regular part of the process. Defect prevention ultimately needs continuous innovation as the features and scope of the TIP increase. The other 2 capabilities to develop are technology innovation and process innovation, along with the associated change management capabilities. This means systematically evaluating the impact of TIP content, but also the opportunities presented by new technologies in expanding the qualities and possible scope of the TIP. The point is that at this maturity level, the TIP should have established the capacity to continuously and systematically improve within its working process. For example, by personalizing the presentation of the TIP to the needs of different users, like importers, exporters, customs brokers, freight forwarders, SMEs, large enterprises, and so on. Or by incorporating a chatbot that will improve over time as it collects more data from users and their needs. This module discussed in some detail a maturity roadmap model for TIPs, which provides a roadmap for a TIP's development. At each maturity level, we highlighted the areas which must be cultivated in the TIP governance in order for it to foster a higher quality of service. In the next module, in line with the idea of continuous innovation, we will discuss possible future evolutions of TIP's content and functionalities.